So here we are, to consider using images and video to develop speaking and writing skills. I need to acknowledge that that this whole project, the VCE Community of Practice, which so far hasn't moved a long way towards being a community of practice, but we have had one meeting, and of course hot on the heels of 4 webinars last year that were really well attended, and I've had some interaction with other people through contact through this project, but is all funded through the current round of Victorian government funding that the MLTAV receives, for which we are very grateful. The next clue in the waiting room. So it's my pleasure to welcome, first of all, Jess Ratua this afternoon. Jess works with me at Melbourne Grammar School as Head of Media Studies and as Teacher of English, and I've asked her particularly to talk about how we might use image to do something other than just describe, which I think as languages teachers we're actually very much more used to, and is probably not what we're being asked to do in the viewing skill of the new study design. So when I find the right button to unshare my screen, Jess will be able to share and start. Thank you very much, Jess.
Hi everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen now and me at the same time. Yep, all good. Thanks for having me. It was quite an honour to be invited, and really something that I think media and English teachers take for granted at times, and I'm sure, please excuse me if I'm telling you stuff that you already know, but perhaps you may just see things in a different way. As I've acknowledged and apologised, sorry, not sorry, prepare for some gaudy colour combos, inconsistent font colour, pixelated images and awkward formatting. It's sort of my way of reminding everyone that we are visual learners largely, even though our language is written and spoken. It doesn't matter what environment we're in. Everything that we have on screen always makes a difference to our students. No matter what the language and no matter what our area of expertise. So in my 25 minutes of fame, who am I and why am I here? Who are they, and why do we need to consider who our clients are? The importance of the why rather than the what. And I think that's really the premise of what Megan was hoping I could cover. That is, using visual imagery, it's really important to understand and deconstruct why and how something means what it does, rather than just what. I'll explain and go through codes and conventions that are, we call them the building blocks of cultural construction. Still images, artifacts of a time and place. I always teach the students that texts don't change, we do, and society does. So when we look back at images from the past, they represent a different culture and a different society, and it's our job to deconstruct them and explain them. And lastly, I'll look at some video advertisements and explain why they're the gifts that keep on giving. Who am I? Yes. I'm an English teacher and a media teacher. Same but different, really. Yes, I stream and watch things for a living, but also at home. Yes, it has affected my ability to concentrate on anything because I've become one of them. I'm the flick around generation, even though I'm not. But we have to acknowledge these things, really. I can use my powers for good, and rather, well, I'd like to think anyway. So at school, I teach 2 classes of Year 12 media, 1 class of Year 11, but over my career, I have taught a variety of other subjects that I think all move well together. Personally, I'm first generation Australian from an Italian migrant background. So my parents were the Italians of the 50s who came out on the boat. So I have been exposed to some varying degrees of English as a second language and other cultural kind of cliches and tropes, I guess. My master's was in visual spatial reasoning in footballers, And as I've put there, I did French and German at school and exchange student stuff, but really they're just all different languages. So I think it's sort of right up my alley, this type of activity. I've got on my screen here what I teach. So I actually teach in Year 12 media, we look at narratives and ideologies, and we look at the ways that texts represent and share ideological values of society. So I teach Rocky IV. If any of you have seen that, I'm hoping all of you have seen that. We teach the way that communist capitalist ideologies are embedded within the text, and we use them as discussion points. So I've included that image there, which was a poster used to sell to a Soviet public rather than an American one. So we look at the ways that we have symbolic representations in that. The hammer and sickle. Ivan Drago is literally a mountain of rock that Rocky has to climb. And that's sort of the way that I would begin analysing and discussing those things with the students. So I would say, well, what's behind him? What's the literal meaning as opposed to the connoted meaning? So we talk about denotation and connotation in that regard. Baz Luhrmann is the master of symbolism and embedded meaning within things. So that Romeo and Juliet version was I'm sure you've all seen it, a text that used cultural references that were out of a different time and place. Oh, sorry. Media messages are polysemic in anyone's language. So that is that they're the perfect platform to generate discussion as process for analytical and evaluative writing, not just comprehension and descriptive pieces. That every text has multiple meanings, regardless of where you're from or what language it is. Why does that keep doing that? I'm making lots of sound effects. There we go. Visual literacy is their bread and butter. Students nowadays are more media savvy and better at interpreting visuals. They speak in a different language. They communicate through images. If you ask a young person where they are or what they're doing, they'll take a photo and send it to you. Or they'll use an emoji to express it. They don't use language in the same way that we have been used to. So our job is to kind of deconstruct that, interpret it, and then make sense of it and enable them to use it. A great term coined by a media theorist in Queensland is that they have become producers. So they are users of text as well as producers of text at the same time. So they use Facebook, they watch people's Facebook at the same time that they're creating content. So they communicate in multiple languages, and we need to be able to understand and teach them how to analyse other people's languages in the same way. Interactionists is an interesting concept too, and that is that it has actually changed the way that they use and create their own languages. So the theory goes that they see culture as being created and maintained by the ways that we interact. And today's students, scarily enough, and Gen Alpha, which is an interesting one. And it's about the way that they understand and are defined by the way they use digital, visual, mobile media. We have to look for things that are in common, so the commonalities that they share rather than always the differences. And I know that in the oral presentation assessment element in VCE, they need to reflect upon and engage with common hobbies, common understandings of global issues, as well as their interpretation of those issues. So I think this should be something that we have to consider. We have to teach them the why and the how, not just the what and where. This is because they need to be engaged, and they don't want to just go back to those Fitzroy readers that taught everyone how to read and then answering comprehension questions. They're beyond that. they understand everything with 20% less text than they used to. So the actual written word isn't as relevant to them anymore. So we have to find ways that they can still play the VCE game and communicate at the same time. We're in the age of semiotics, but they just don't realize it. We need to equip them with the linguistic features to be able to articulate what they're doing so that they can still achieve their best. So codes and conventions are words that I'll keep using a lot of, because it's the language that we as English teachers and media teachers use to describe these things. So put simply, I mean, we talk about technical and written codes and symbolic codes, the same with conventions. So the conventions of storytelling, the conventions of a genre. If you were to ask me the conventions of French cinema, I'm sure those of you who teach French would be able to understand it, and we teach it in the lower levels, I understand. Conventions of anime, conventions, they're all stylistic qualities that we sort of take for granted and the students take for granted, but there is meaning that is embedded within them via these codes and conventions. There's a certain type of music, there's a certain color palette, there's a certain setting, and this is common to all film genres, really. Deconstructing a text to prompt discussion rather than just comprehensions and description has culture embedded within it. And we just need to find ways to capitalize on those. So I think the first thing I wanted to do was just to try and show you how I would start. And that is, this is one of my favorites. Board games reflect cultures. It tells us lots about what people like to do. I know that there are basic units that all language teachers use about hobbies and pastimes and, you know, who do you live with and where do you live and what do you like to do? Conversational questions when we find out about one another. But it's also interesting to see the values that are inherent within each of the texts. So Battleship is one of my favorites. So the type of activity or the basic questions that I always ask are these. So we look at the board game itself and we ask the basics. So this is the what. So what are the people doing in the image? And I get the students to look at the images and they have a little bit of time and they look at it and we all around the room will say, okay, well, this is happening, this is happening. Then we look at the colors, the connotations, the values, the texts, representations, and then the final question is about how someone else would interpret them. So I begin with what are the people doing in the image? So pardon the awkward Zoom, but how great is this? I love it so much. And obviously, normally I would say, okay, you know, whoever else, I'll just keep talking for the sake of muting and unmuting if that's okay. But we would say, okay, what are they doing and in the main image and who's being portrayed? And I always get, well, we've got a dad and a son, we've got a father and a son, and they're playing Battleship. And then in the foreground, so the main image, so when we talk about the hierarchy of the image, the biggest image on the box is the father and son playing the game. And in the background, we assume mother and daughter are in the kitchen and they are having such a great time smiling, watching father and son playing Battleship, and they're doing the dishes. So that's the what, right? We see representations of a father and son, a mother and daughter. That is a family. So that's how we sort of break it down. Obviously, the next step would be where I would say, well, would they be doing this in a different, I always ask, what would they be doing today, or what would that image look like today if it looked any different? The second thing I would ask them about is the colours that are used. So remember that we have colour coding in different cultures that represent different things. So obviously the dominant colours in this particular image are the red, white and blue. So it's an American game. We know it's an American game because it tells us so on the box, but also because of the portrayal of the people in it. So we have to know that as a Western society, we interpret those colours to mean certain things, whereas in other cultures, the colours would actually have a different meaning. So I've done some awkward colour coding there just to keep you on your toes. But we know just the basics of, you know, black for funerals in Western cultures, white for Eastern. When is the use of green or red, lucky or unlucky? Then I would take it that step further in my kind of analysis, where I would be looking at ideas to do with patriotism or capitalism or those kind of things, which is a little bit further. But it's by no accident. The boys always are like, oh, but what if they're just the clothes they're wearing? Yeah, I don't think so. They are presented quite deliberately. We even talk about the costumes and what if we could identify a time period. I usually comment on the fact that the girl, I think the little girl has pants in the image. It's a bit hard to see there, but she's actually wearing a pair of pants, which I thought was pretty cool, pretty progressive for that age. But, you know, mum's in an apron, nicely presented, and they're having a great time because it's important to them that the men are having a great time, right? As far as the text itself, so that is the words. I always talk about the literal, so the connotation and the denotation of the text. So on the cover of the box, it says, it's a hit. So, you know, the denotation is that the battleship is sunk. So the kid yells out, it's a hit. And dad kind of goes, oh no. But we can interpret the fact that Battleship is popular. America's all-time favorite game. The denotation, obviously, that Battleship, the board game, is traditionally a much-loved family game. The connotation that war is a game and that, hey, America loves war. So that's sort of the way that I would look at the physical text. Then we look at values and representations. And again, I think it is about asking your students what the representations, let's say the father, the son, the mother, the daughter, do they mean this, have the same associated value with them? You know, representations of gender. We express things like this. We say things like men should be well presented and prepared for battle. That's obviously an interpretation rather than a description of what's actually there. The students often make comment, they're a bit scared to say something like a woman's place is in the kitchen. Teaching all boys and having a female teacher, they're a bit afraid to say something like that. But I say it for them. And then we say, well, this is a box from the 1950s. There's nothing wrong with that. There was nothing unusual about that. War, it's a game played by men. Well, literally it was a game played by men because women weren't in combat. So we have to understand that the culture and the associated values are always embedded within the images that we see. Also ideas to do with a nuclear family being a mum, a dad, a brother and a daughter. We know that in the cultures of languages that we teach, families look different. And there isn't always that. We've got extended families and those kind of things. So prompted discussions like, what does a family look like to the culture whose language you're teaching? Where and how would they be framed? How would their clothes tell us about their nationality? What are they doing that informs us about what language they speak? What do they value? Do they value family time? So I think some of these discussions can be prompted certainly from a board game, really. I'll keep moving if that's all right. I've really just got a video advertisement to show you, or two of them, and how I would break that down as well. I feel like I'm rocketing ahead, but hopefully that's fine. Just keep on going. So again, I would start with the basics. I would ask a series of questions. So I would put this in a handout with a table that I've constructed, and I would also put those particular questions on the board so that they've got a hard copy in front of them to write and the visual. I always play the ad from start to finish. They're usually only 30 seconds or 40 seconds so that they're not interrupted, and their understanding of what they're saying isn't affected by the questions, essentially. And then I ask the basics. What do we see, hear, and read? So is there music? Are there sound effects? Is there a voiceover? Do I hear an accent? What am I seeing? Is there any text? Then we go back to the things that I just gave you the examples of with the board game. How is it being constructed? Why is it being constructed that way? What is the effect on the audience? And would every audience respond in the same way? So I've just got a couple of different ones that are oldies but goodies. This one, Think Fresh pasta ad, is a ripper. And I'll just play it through and then we'll have a talk about it.
Hi. All right, big guy, you're in charge. You got to play tea parties, dress ups, and you got to feed them. And you better make something that's good for them. Well, she'll know. She always knows. Don't worry, there is a way. It's fast, fresh, and it's in the fridge. That's for you. Go ahead and tell Mum about this, kids. Delicious. You are the man.
Think fresh. Think Latina.
Right? So we would talk about it and I would ask the questions, what do we see? What do we hear? What do we read? I would scaffold these things. I would say we see representations of a family, a mum, a dad, and 2 kids. We see a working mum, perhaps, leaving the girls with dad. We've got some girly girls. They're in pink tutus. There's a reference to tea parties. We've got quite a blokey dad with a beard, and there's lots of big guy. You know, it's up to you. Mum's the boss. There's costume and dialogue referring to the fear of her, like that cutaway where she just raises her eyebrow a little. Just that shot to her means she's always watching, look out. House in the suburbs. We can see from the artwork, there's kids' paintings and all of those types of things in there. What do we hear? Well, we hear, there's no music, but we hear dialogue. We've got our voiceover, which is his voice. So we've got the voice in his head, essentially, but not really. It's like his self-talk. All right, big guy, you're in charge. You are the man. Think fresh, think Latina. What do we read? We have think fresh, think Latina. We look at the ways that it's constructed. So how have we interpreted those elements? Is it because it's an Australian ad and we are Australian and we understand how things work? Would everyone construct the same meaning? That is of the same age, gender, cultural background through the language, etc. The framing and hierarchy of the image, who or what is the focal point? So the moment where the little girl actually gets the pasta out of the fridge, she's the one that's come up with the idea, not really dad. Who's in the background, who's in the foreground of the image, and what does that tell us about them and their role? So that would be the sort of what and who and the why. We use basics of image analysis to deconstruct those codes and conventions. So a 30-second ad has so much embedded meaning, even just through the visual aesthetic. It's interesting that advertisers always understand how, the reason I'm so keen on using advertisements is because advertisers' business is to sell, and they present an idea that appeals to the broad cultural value. So they're never going to show anything subversive to sell because they don't have the widest reach. Pop culture is named accordingly. It needs to be relatable and express the dominant values of a society. So when we look at advertisements, we're pretty much guaranteed that whatever they're saying, selling, wearing, speaking, the colors, all of those things are what we can expect from that particular society, or what it tells us about their cultural values. They value family. This one here is appealing to Latina fresh. Think fresh, think Latina. So that's a shift from think fast or think healthy. I suppose it's sort of the same way. Or think easy. That was the other one. If dad can do it, then anyone can do it, you know. This is what I mean about talking about Australian culture in the 2010s. You know, the fact that mum's leaving dad with the kids is certainly different too. When we think about the slogan, even mum would be happy with what dad's done. We talk about the family unit. And interestingly, this is the bottom bit that I think is the most poignant, that there's very little to do with being Italian, whereas traditionally any of those pasta sauces or pasta brands, they've got, it's always about the bringing Italian into the kitchen, or as good as Nonna would make, or, you know, you see the Legos ads now, they're exactly the same. But this one's selling what's inside rather than the stereotype of it's Australian being Australian rather than trying to eat like Italians. Sorry. I'll just show you this one because this is what a 1993 version looks like.
Since their customers discovered Latino fresh pasta and pasta sauces, some Italian restaurants have been a little quiet. Latino fresh, the pasta and sauces you used to go out for.
So if we use all of the stuff that I've spoken about previously, what can you hear? We've got traditional Italian music. What do we see? We've got typical kind of tropes of what an Italian looks like. We've got nonna or mama in the kitchen. We've got the guy with the moustache and the dark hair. What's the message? We just think about the things that were presented and how we interpret them differently, I guess. So that really, I did have one more, which I love. It's a 30-second ad. Can I show you this one as well? Do we have time?
Yeah, I think you can sneak a minute or two. I'll trim my bit at the end.
Yeah, it's just, I think I'm hopeful. So this is my my close activity, using all of the skills that we've just explored. Could you, if you were to present this to a class of your own, what do you hear? What do you see? What do we read? What is the message telling us? What does a family look like? What is the culture like? And here we have.
Five, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Ready? Let's go!
I love seeing my children happy, and I only give them what I trust. I can always count on Kinder Joy to provide happiness in more ways than one. First, a delicious combination of cocoa and milky cream with 2 crispy wafer balls. Also, exciting toys for boys and girls that stimulate their minds. And of course, a moment of family joy. Kinder Joy, happiness multiplied.
I love it because it's, again, it's got everything. What does a family look like? What is the value? What's the priority? Who's in the ad? Is there a color aesthetic? What are the key words that we take out? It's not just what or who's in the ad, it's what it's telling us about that particular culture. It's not Kinder Surprise, or they don't want to say Kinder Überraschung as they would in German. It's a whole different story. So I think I'm hopeful that what I've what I've presented is relevant to, or perhaps useful. It's the very basic form of keep the questions really simple, and then expand them out. So it's the what are we seeing? What are we hearing? How is it being constructed via the codes and conventions? And would another culture read it in the same way? Would another audience read it in the same way? What does it tell us about a particular culture? And that's it. That's all from me. I've used another pop culture icon there to say goodbye.
Thanks very much, Jess. I certainly echo Catherine's comment in the chat that it was a brilliant presentation. I think really important for where we're at as languages teachers. Are there any burning questions that anybody?
Sorry, I probably should have.
That's all right. Any burning questions anyone would like to ask Jess before we move on and invite Amanda to share her screen? If things occur as we go through the remaining hour, please feel free to put questions into chat. I meant to say that at the start and was distracted by letting people in from the lobby.
Sorry, I reckon, sorry, Megan, just that, oh, thank you. You're very kind, everyone. I really had no idea, to be honest. I didn't have that chat window open, but now I've just seen it. I think the quick one there from Olympia about vocab, we have to remember, or I'm hopeful that most of the students have done these type of language, like to do with, you know, framing or composition, or all of the things that are design elements in the arts that they've done. Also in English, even at year 7 and 8, we look at, they will look at newspaper articles. So they're used to analysing newspaper article images and annotating on the actual thing about the priorities. So I think that a lot of the vocab that we assume they need, they just have to be reminded of it. So that's what I mean. Does that make sense? Target language. Oh, right. Yep. Yeah, that is out of my jurisdiction.
Sorry, I'll just, if I can unmute for a second. Sorry, my camera's not working and I'm talking to a black void. I mean, from the perspective of second language acquisition, and this is always a problem, even at the higher levels, they don't always have the vocabulary to look at advertisements. There's, like for Italian, for example, there's a wonderful series of Motta, the cake makers in Italy. They have this ridiculous storyline of 3 ads about the asteroid falling from the sky, right? So, you know, for them to enjoy and understand even you've got the one layer of the viewing, which is all the technical stuff which you're talking. Yes, they get all that in that language from English, but what about the vocabulary? They need to understand the actual advertisement to get some meaning out of it if it's not an English ad. That's what I'm referring to about target language and scaffolding in vocab.
Is the language that's spoken in the ad necessary for understanding the storyline though? Because often advertisements, the movement and the sound sort of helps tell the story.
Well, if you're teaching second languages and we're looking at the skill of viewing in the VCE study design for many of these languages, then we are watching them in those languages. So, you know, and they do speak very quickly as well. So there has to be some type of, you know, breakdown or, you know, point where you're giving students the ability to understand what's going on, short of throwing on subtitles or something like that, you know. So I think so. And there's also meaning, like there's so many, I mean, ads, as you correctly said, are very clever, and they're designed, you know, the strategies behind ads is to sell and to increase sales. So Italians are pretty good at doing that, you know, and even the French. I mean, all the ads that I use in class, the kids just won't understand them. You know, they can view them, but they won't understand what's being said unless we do something about that, you know.
Yeah, I understand completely. And I actually reckon that that's why sometimes I suppose I'm trying to teach, it's a visual language rather than a spoken one, even though they have to speak it in the language. I suppose I would be trying to do a similar breakdown that I said about, well, what colors do we see what iconography do we see? What other characters do we see where we don't need to hear it? I suppose that would be one way. And yeah, that from Catherine's comment there about the images, that's what I mean. We need to look at the image, deconstructing the image to use with the language. But yeah, you're right, Olympia. I think
and I'm going to break in there and move this along a little bit, because I think, Olympia, this might come up right towards the end. A couple of things that I'll share with you as well, because I think one of the challenges for us as languages teachers sometimes is to throw them in the deep end and find ways of scaffolding support for them, not to think that we have to have everything set up beforehand, or that they need necessarily to always have all the vocab they might need beforehand. Thank you so much, Jess. It was brilliant, and obviously it could have gone on for the entire hour and a half. Very busy time for you, and I'm very grateful. Amanda, I welcome you from ClickView. A number of you, I think, in your schools have subscriptions to ClickView, and the Education Department makes some use of ClickView as well. I know that I have access to it here and have had in my previous couple of schools. And it's kind of on that basis that I approached Amanda to present this evening, in that I think there are a whole stack of things that ClickView can do that help us as languages teachers. And I think sometimes we don't think it's going to be us, so we don't necessarily turn up to the PDs that run in our schools. And sometimes those people running the PDs forget about us as well. And there's been quite a bit of movement recently in things that might be useful for us in ClickView. So thank you very much, Amanda.
All right, hopefully everyone can hear me, and I will apologise in advance if you can hear any barking or children crying in the background, because it's sickness season. So of course my daughter's home from childcare today, so I do apologise in advance. But if you do need anything repeated or would like me to slow down, please do use the chat box, because I'll keep that open as I present. So good afternoon. Thank you so much, Megan, for having me. Jess, that was a really great presentation, and speaking as a former English teacher myself, that really resonated with me. And also I did have a short stint teaching Italian, but only to year 8. So while I wasn't able to focus on viewing like you guys are in the VCE classroom, I'm hoping that my experience and also knowledge of ClickView will hopefully be useful to you guys. So what I basically want to show you is how we can help. And also, if you don't have ClickView, if you want to know more about it, you can also just pop your school into the chat box, and I'll make sure that I can follow up with each of you. So we're going to have a look at what's available on ClickView in other languages. I'm going to spotlight one particular feature where you can potentially find a lot of good content for your classes, called ClickView TV. I'm going to show you how to create a shorter clip of a longer video. Also going to show you how you can make the videos that we have on the platform into interactive experiences. As Jess just finished saying, I mean, this is the whole point of viewing and visual text, is that you don't just view it, but you actually pick it apart a bit more. So let's see how we can interact with that within the ClickView platform. I'm also going to touch on something called Immersive Reader, which is a Microsoft feature we integrate with really well. And lastly, I'm going to float the idea by you that perhaps you might like to think about uploading your own video content or student video content onto the platform. So firstly, where to find language content? I suppose one step back, for anyone who doesn't have ClickView, ClickView is basically a video platform which is secure and locked down via a login. So each school will have a subscription, and usually you will log in using your usual school login details by a single sign-on. Students also have access to certain areas of ClickView as well. So it's like a database for educational video. The reason we do lock it down is because we actually produce our own content in the languages area, amongst all the other areas, subject areas as well. But we also license content, so we pay for that to be able to distribute to you. And lastly, we do record free-to-air content and Foxtel content, remove the ads, and make that available for you to use in your schools. And you can do that safely with ClickView because your schools all have screen rights licenses that give you the the permission to use broadcast content in your classes. So the first option, and let me just see if I can turn on my, can I? Maybe not. I just wanted to show you my little mouse. Government schools do have access, care of the Department of Education until at least the end of next year. So if you can see my mouse, hopefully, I'm just pointing towards the Libraries tab at the top of the ClickView dashboard, which is what you should see when you log in for the first time. And if we go down to the secondary library where you will be looking, there is the languages category there. And I would also recommend that you go and have a dip into the geography and the history categories as well, because as Jess was talking about earlier, you know, connotation surely does depend on a good understanding of the history of, you know, of the society where the visual text comes from, and, you know, how to interpret what you're seeing, what's denoted on the screen does sort of rely on that historical and geographical context knowledge as well. So even though you might find, say you're teaching Italian, for example, you know, it's probably important for your students to have a knowledge of Italian history that will then help them to interpret what you're watching. The other place you can look at is just, the other place you can find language content is just by using the search box at the top right corner. And that keyword search box actually takes you out to a search result screen where you can use some filters to your advantage. At the end of this, at the end of today's PD, I will share with Megan to distribute to you all as well. We also have some playlists that we have curated ourselves that include some content from BBC Teach, which is a very well-renowned source of educational video content, which we've just acquired. So I'll be pointing you towards those playlists as well. We've got them for a handful of languages, about half a dozen. So let me just pop out of here and show you what I mean with the search bar up here on the top right. Hopefully you can still see my screen, click view screen. So in the search bar up here, I might just go ahead and look for something on Terracotta Warriors, which it's actually just picked up. I'm just gonna pop in Terracotta Warriors up here. I've used quotation marks just to keep it really relevant, because otherwise I get all sorts of things about warriors and about terracotta, but nothing that contains the two words together. And it's come up with 15 results here. So these might be relevant to me, they may not be, but I think a search list of 16 results, because I've used those quotation marks to keep it contained, is, you know, relatively manageable to have a look through. You might also actually know the name of the program that you're looking for. So in that case, you could just go ahead and pop the title of the program up here in the search box. On the left-hand side, I'm just going to click on Show More Filters, and here you can actually use these to your advantage. I would just like to show you that we have got some videos that have interactive videos already made. So these interactive videos are just like a layer of questions that sit on top of the video, which actually pause the video and ask a question of the students. And it made me think of when Jess was talking about, you know, before you show an ad, you might go through the questions and scaffold them. Having those questions up on the board, very helpful. And then you might even, instead of doing it the old-fashioned way, I don't want to say old-fashioned way in a negative way at all, but you can actually embed those questions into the video so that they don't have to leave the screen. So if students are accessing a video on their own device, then they can just be watching it, and at a particular time point, a question could pop up and they could put their answers in. I mean, that, you know, having it written down on a piece of paper also allows you to go back to a question and add more information in. So there are limitations to this kind of interactive video arrangement, but you may find it useful anyway. I'll just show you very quickly what it looks like. So I'll click on this video. This is the one I've decided to go with. You can see the interactive videos tab on the bottom has a number 1. That means there's one video, one interactive already created. You can have a look at the question list. Gives me a rundown of where the questions will pop up and at what time codes. And if I like the look of that, then I can save that to my workspace. You can also print it as a worksheet as well if you've got students who always forget to bring their laptops nice and charged, or maybe don't have their laptops at all. Once I've saved that with my workspace, saved it into my workspace, it will live in an interactive videos folder. You can see hopefully that my screen has changed to my personal workspace here and in my interactive videos. So this is what the students would see. Along the bottom here, you have colored lines, which denote a question will pop up at that particular time. So when we get there, the question pauses, the video pauses, and the question pops up here. So just start to think about popping those, those basic questions about what do we see here, or what does, I have no idea about teaching this particular topic in a Chinese language classroom, but what does the shape of the roof tell you about architecture or power structures or whatever? So we've got all these purple ones, the true or false ones. There's another color here, and that will denote a different question type. I don't have to wait to have a look at all of these. I can show you back over here. So these are the 6 question types that you can use: multiple choice, short answer, true or false, missing word, and then there's also annotation and there's image as well, which these 2 question types don't invite any participation from the student, or they don't invite rather a response that they have to type in, but they could be really useful to you if, for example, you wanted to scaffold an answer to the question. So let's say, for example, you wanted to ask one of those analysis questions. You could firstly put an annotation that has a sample answer in the target language or scaffolding the language that you want the students to use. And then immediately after that annotation, you could pop the short answer question in there for the students then to put their answers in. It's just that was an example that I thought of when I was listening to when I saw the comment from Olympia just about how to scaffold that. You could also use an annotation as an opportunity to put a word bank in, if that could be helpful. So that's one very powerful tool that you have whenever you're using a video within ClickView. Any video can be made into an interactive experience rather than just a passive viewing experience. And you may choose to use this or not, but it's definitely available. I also just want to talk about Microsoft Immersive Reader here, because it is not a ClickView feature, but it is it's a Microsoft accessibility feature that we've integrated in. So you can see this little logo here. This is the Immersive Reader logo. If I click on that, it will basically take the interactive question out into this Immersive Reader window. And you can do lots of things with Immersive Reader, but its main purpose was that you push play and the computer will read out what is said on the screen. So an obvious accessibility feature. But the other cool thing about it is that if you click on reading preferences, it will automatically translate it for you. So you can do translate by document and that will automatically translate it for you. I'm not exactly, I'm not up to speed with what sort of the standard practice is in terms of whether you do offer translations, especially automatic translations, because obviously we know they can be problematic, but it is an option there. It could be useful for differentiating within your classroom if some students need it, if some students may not. But this option is here. So if you, for example, used an annotation card in a video that you did scaffold some sort of response in the target language, then that student could then click on the immersive reader, take it out here and translate it back in English to practice with, with that language acquisition there. So that's one very small feature of Immersive Reader that I just wanted to alert you to, and that's available for any interactive card that you put into the video. So whether it's multiple choice or true or false or annotation or whatever. The other great thing, which I won't go into too much detail about now, is that all of the responses to the interactive questions will come back to your workspace. So in your workspace, you go into interactive videos folder. I'll just find this one. You will find the results and you can have an overview of what the students have been able to answer, as well as how much of the video they've actually let play through at full speed. The orange is when they've let it play and the black is when they've fast forwarded. So I'll leave that for you to interpret as you wish. Cool. Okay, so that's the part about the interactives. Let's go back here. Yes, the other thing I wanted to do was just put a spotlight on ClickView TV. So firstly, as I said, we do record free-to-air content and we also record Foxtel. The free-to-air content is like on a running recording schedule that we keep for 4 weeks at a time. So at the moment, we have servers around the world. That's certainly one for each state that's relevant for you in Australia that has the last 4 weeks worth of free-to-air content. Now, if nobody requests the content after 4 weeks, it disappears. So you do have the 4 weeks. But if someone has requested it, then what happens is that it lives on the exchange. So that's like our historical archive of free-to-air and Foxtel content. You can search for anything that you have heard. So any captions that are available on the free-to-air content are searchable. So you would search in this search box here for any word mentioned during the program. This could also be really useful for if you are finding an ad, like I'm just thinking of the current ad that's on at the moment for Target. There's an ad where I think a young woman is wearing a pair of pants at her grandmother's house, her nonna's house, and she's just finished eating a massive meal. And the tagline is something like, Target pants are approved by nonna or something like that, or tested by nonna. So if you remember that if it's on in the background, or if you're watching it, during dinner or whatever at home, and you think, oh yeah, I was watching, I don't know, that's on ABC, whatever you're watching, Married at First Sight. It was on the other night and I saw that ad, then you could go and find that recording of the show and then cut out the ad from there. So you can actually find TV ads on ClickView if you know of any that are being shown in the last 4 weeks that you want to use. You can also search by program name. So that's probably where I would go if I was looking for Beauty and the Geek finale or whatever it is. We also have a curated TV guide, but it's not super relevant for languages because it's mainly catering to the English language programming. So let's show you what that looks like on the platform. So we're in TV now. I've clicked on TV at the top, and here is that closed caption search. Here is a list of channels that I can search for as well. I would like to bring your attention to World Movies channel here because we have access to anything that's shown on World Movies. I also just discovered today that unfortunately all of the target language or foreign language news programs have actually recently moved off the SBS free-to-air channel because they've recently launched a new free-to-air channel called World Watch. So we have requested that World Watch does get recorded for ClickView so that you will have access to language news reports if they could be useful for you. But in the meantime, we do have SBS, SBS World Movies and SBS Viceland, which the SBS and SBS Viceland often will have like historical and social contextual content that would help, you know, with your connotations of your texts. But World Movies could be a really good place for you to find a key scene that you'd like to focus on for a movie in your target language. So if I do click on World Movies, it basically gives me the last 4 weeks worth of dates. If I can click on, I remember whatever I'm looking for was on the 16th of July. And maybe it was Little Nicholas. I have no idea what this is. But anyway, if that is the movie that I would like to use as my visual text, I'm going to click on add, and I can either request an ad-free copy if I like, which I think you would like, or if you don't want to use the whole film, which is probably a bit of an ask, you can actually just edit it. So you can cut down a scene from that movie. Thank you for your question, Catherine. You don't only get access for 4 weeks of the movie. No, you only have 4 weeks to retrieve the copy of the film or whatever the program is. Once you've added it to your workspace, like what I'm doing now, it lives in your workspace forever. Megan, thank you also for your thank you for your question as well about the interactive data. You can just delete the interactive videos in your workspace to clear that data. If you want it to use the same interactive video for a new class, then make a copy of it so that you have a new copy for your new class. Otherwise, all the results will be amalgamated.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go ahead and edit this one because I want to show you how to make a shorter clip of a longer video. So I've just clicked on edit, it takes me out to this ClickView Cloud editor, and say I know that I know the time code. I'm just going to go ahead and drag my timer to this particular scene because that's where I want it to start, and I click insert break. And then I'm going to click to the end of the scene that I want, and I can insert another break there. Maybe that's it, and I just want that little scene. Then I'm just going to double click either side of that, and that is what I have now saved. And I click on save. That will be processing in the background, and it will be getting ready to be stored in my workspace here. If I wanted a couple of scenes from that movie spliced together, then I can also do that. What did I see before? Bella Sebastian is a really popular one for French teachers. So here it is here at the top. I click on options and again, add it to my workspace. There it is there. I click on options and I click on edit video. Launching that editor again. Say I want this point to that point. Plus I also want another scene over here. Can you see those lines that I'm inserting here? These become like little chapter time codes. And if I click on the chapter tab over here, you can see all of the chapters. So if I wanted to get rid of this bit and also this bit and also that bit, you can see what's happening to the blue portion underneath. This is just going to save 1, 2, 3, 4 scenes and splice them together when I click save. It's going to cut out all of the other bits. So that's something that you could have a play around with if you do know of any particular film that you would like to use in the classroom. I'm loving how wowed you are, Catherine, by this. So I'm hoping there are similar reactions behind the other Zoom participants' windows. And I know I've gone really, really quickly through this, but again, if I can, when I distribute those playlists, I'll also distribute some links to some training channel videos that you can watch and rewatch as many times as you want to, so that you really know what you're doing and feel confident. Okay, I know I'm getting close to my time now. So the other thing, oh yes, Foxtel. Back in the TV tab here, I love that idea, Olympia. Yes. Take a 2-hour film, cut it into 10-minute episodes and use it over a 4-week period to engage your students. And the best thing about that also is that you don't have to remember where you push stop on the DVD player, because it'll all be prepared for you. Yeah, so I just wanted to say, if you do know of anything on Foxtel that you wanted to use, then you can request a Foxtel program by clicking on this orange button here. The only thing with Foxtel is because we don't have a running record of that, you do have to request that in advance. So about 48 hours in advance, please, so that we can organise to do that. I suppose here, the most relevant channels that we have available for you could be Discovery, again, for that historical or geographical contextual information to help your students interpret the texts. Also, there was, I think, Fox Docos, yep. And also for Japanese teachers, we do have NHK World. Nat Geo could be relevant as well. Yeah, so hopefully that is helpful and interesting to you. And just to make sure I haven't missed anything that was super important. Yes, the last thing. So recording your own content. And I guess this is another example that came to me when Olympia was asking about how to potentially scaffold the content or scaffold the language. You know, you would model language in your classes all the time, and potentially, I'm going to take a guess that maybe over the last 2 or 3 years, you've already recorded yourselves for use during remote learning. Now, if you do have any videos of yourself, or you want to record yourself discussing a text, you know, commenting on, you know, whatever that text says about family or what have you, then you can record your video and upload it to the ClickView workspace. What you can then do, because remember I said anything on the ClickView platform can be made into an interactive, is that you can then put interactive questions or annotations or whatever onto, embed them onto the video that you've recorded yourself. Furthermore, students have access to this feature too. So as students log into ClickView, they can also record themselves and upload it. No, not everyone can see your uploaded content unless you make it available and share it to everybody. What I would be doing is making sure that when you click on the share button, which I'll just quickly show you. So I don't know if I've got anything in here that I've recorded. Oh, here's one. This was just recorded on a phone on the ClickView app. When you click on share, you can alter the privacy settings here. So if you want to make it private, if you just want to keep it available just to your school, so only people at your school can click on the link and view it, or if you want to make it public and share it for parents at home to view or language tutors or whatever. Anybody who's teaching at a language centre, which is not connected to an actual school, then you would be selecting this one here, everyone public. Yeah, and when you share that link with them, then they will be able to watch it. So recording, you know, your own content is super helpful, especially if they are practicing for their external exams, their oral examinations. It's always really beneficial to record yourself and to watch yourself back. Also get some peer feedback as well. You know, consider doing that on ClickView as well. So I'm going to stop there. Are there any questions that have popped up? Or I think more than that, of course I will answer any questions, but I'd really be curious to know if anyone has had any other sort of aha ideas on how you might use this in your classes. You can feel free to just pop it in the
Amanda,
chat.
maybe if I can just comment briefly, I think possibly the screen grab of the Japanese animated one before was one of mine, maybe.
Yes, it was, yes.
Yeah, one of the challenges I had when I first came across this about before COVID that I first used during COVID was that at the time, the only way I could find access to the Studio Ghibli animations was in English because they hadn't been shown free to air in Japanese. However, and the reason that the brief example that you saw of mine coming up had it had a question in Japanese about what were the little black soot sprites called, was because I gave it to my students as, 10-minute each lesson online to sort of try and keep them going, as someone suggested before. And so at the end of each kind of episode, I might have put a small research task like, before you come to class tomorrow, see what you can find out about these. And so the last question of each episode was also the first question of the next, but it also meant I could ask language-based questions, or I could ask for a sentence about what was going on or something like that, in what was actually an English audio version of the animation.
Yeah,
I found that quite
such a good idea.
Beginning year 9s who didn't actually have much Japanese language anyway.
Yeah, I've just brought that example up from
so that was the end of my first episode,
video.
and then they had to go and they had to type up an answer. Was question 1 of the next episode as well.
Yeah, look, honestly, the way that you use interactive videos are limited only to your own imagination and creativity. And that's a great way to segment the longer video into shorter parts. And look, in terms of, I said before, you probably wouldn't show a whole film, but again, I have no idea. You can use your own creativity. And again, I also just want to reiterate the whole relevance of having the historical and geographical contextual information available, because, for instance, in history, you have stuff on the Vietnam War here, you have conflicts in the Middle East. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of these pages here, but there's so much stuff that students will find helpful to enrich their interpretation of whatever you're showing. Even if they're just learning that and understanding that in English, it will help them to interpret it better. And I also just want to, sorry, before I go, I do want to acknowledge, I know we don't have every language available. And so that's, it's an apology for, especially because of the people who I'm talking to. No, we don't have a lot of content on every language available, but we are always on the hunt to curate more relevant language content. And I would like to invite you all, if you do know of any free to air, especially, but any other content that's being used and distributed that we could potentially license and host on our platform, please do feed that back to content@clickview.com.au so that we can better serve you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. So hopefully some wowed people, and we'll get a chance to use that. I am going to share my screen again and go very rapidly through. I think this is through the slides that we haven't used, and just quickly add some examples of tying together the sort of, hopefully a little bit, the things that we've heard from Jess and Amanda in terms of things that I've been doing. And if we do have a few minutes at the end and others would like to share what they've been doing, that would be fantastic. Or if everyone's just completely branded and wants to go home, I'd understand that as well. So in terms of viewing, I'm going to show you this tiny little clip. It's about a minute and a bit of Spirited Away in Japanese, which for the majority of you won't be a comprehensible language, is my guess, but I don't think that will matter, and I think it allows us to explore some other things. Hopefully it works, and I've pressed all the right buttons. I'm hoping that did come through to you. Nobody seems to have put in chat that it didn't. So that to any kind, I mean, in Japanese, there would be quite a bit of language there that I think students would struggle with at all levels, less by year 12 perhaps, but even at year 12. So the sorts of questions that I was kind of brainstorming with myself this afternoon that I think I would be asking in whatever language it was I was teaching is, and similar to Jess's, interestingly, I didn't have the what did you read. I think that's the one I need to add. What did you see? What did you hear? But I also think the things like, what did you start to think about? What did you notice that seemed very Japanese to you in this case, but whatever the appropriate language and culture is? What would have been different if this had been set in Australia? I think within our study designs and the VCE courses now, there's a lot more focus on that comparative, both culture and language sort of comparative stuff. How many words did you understand? I think it's really, really important to teach our students, and I think viewing is a great opportunity for this, to not freak out at the amount that they don't understand, but to hang on to the stuff that they do. So to be noting down, you know, words that they understand and not worrying about all the ones that they didn't. Because I think we have, all of us across languages, and, you know, as many of you know, I did 3 foreign languages for year 12. And, you know, there was plenty I didn't understand in French, German and in Japanese, even at year 12, and possibly some I should have if I'd been a better, more regular learner of my vocabulary. But I also was one of those students, and I was in music as well, who nervousness got in the way of my listening and my capacity to manage and interpret oral input. And as a quite a successful musician, I was an awful soloist for a very long time, because that anxiety effect on my oral processing and audio processing meant I was often slightly out of tune. But put me in a choir or put me in an orchestra and I was absolutely reliable. So I think that's a quite real experience for a lot of our kids when they get nervous, and therefore trying to find ways to get them to focus in on what they get with no emphasis at all on what they didn't can be a really helpful question to ask. Where do you think it is? What do you think might happen in the film, just from the little bits you get from the trailer? And what cultural artifacts did you notice? If you were in their scenes, what might you have smelled? So thinking about all of the sensory things and imagining them as well. Did you recognise any references or allusions to other stories, other traditions, films, etc.? There's also the question, even at VCE at 11 and 12, remembering that VCE is both 11 and 12, that we can't forget the 11s, is should the questions be posed in English or the target language? And I guess the study design makes some suggestions to us that some English in some settings is actually quite a reasonable and good thing to do, so that students' cultural exploration of ideas is not limited necessarily by their grasp of the target language. On the other hand, for some of you who are teaching students in particularly languages like Arabic, where many of those kids do have some home language background, you know, you can probably do a whole lot more in the target language than in some other settings. Similarly, around some topics, probably you can do more in the target language, but that's a whole discussion that obviously people are having and will continue to have quite animatedly, I imagine. And the other thing is thinking through this sort of thinking routines that many of us in our schools have looked at in quite some detail in the last 5 to 10 years. And the sort of see, think, wonder and think, pair, share routines can work really well as activities in the target language to develop viewing skills. Speaking, and this is very specific, as an example about the oral exam discussion. This is the stage that I've been working at, I guess, at the moment with my Year 12 class, who are actually have all chosen ukiyo-e images from the Hiroshige Tokaido Road series as part of our work on the old Tokaido Road, the road that links Tokyo and Kyoto. And so to try and get them out of the describe the picture routine, I've worked with them in this way. This is my partially worked example to them that, you know, what draws the eye in this image, and probably the thing that in some ways most draws the eye is not circled, because it's probably the large white roof in the middle. But in each of these areas, if each of these areas could be a springboard off to a deeper, richer cultural discussion, you know, what might there be? Do I know what these things are? This is based on some work a student did last year. And so, you know, particular things of interest that he found in his research around these buildings is, it gives us a hint perhaps about the time of year, because of what we know about the Tokaidos. There's probably a Japanese inn somewhere for travellers to stop, because we know that this is a one of the resting stations along the Tokaido. But what is not necessarily obvious here, but some research, you know, into it was interesting, is that it's actually really, really unusual for this town of Kambara to have heavy snow. At the same time, the years in which this series was created, there were quite a number of natural disasters and general hardship in Japan. So the choice of the artist to create an unusual snow, difficult kind of image for Kambara possibly had other reasons that are really interesting stuff to discuss in that discussion part of the second part of the oral exam. But so that I found it quite useful with the boys to sit and just brainstorm in either English, Japanese, or a weird mixture of the two, as to just get a bit more depth into what they're seeing in their image and try and shift them away from saying, well, you know, we've got a mountain and snow-covered pine trees and 3 figures and some buildings. That's not going to fill 8 minutes, and it's not going to be very interesting, and it's not going to develop ideas and cultural understandings. But I found this technique actually quite useful for getting students to think more deeply and get more out of their images. The other things I do to try and use image to develop their speaking skills and to develop for that oral exam, is to get them to brainstorm questions and to get them to show their image to all sorts of other people that know nothing about the background, to ask them what questions they might ask about this image, and just keep a collection of as many questions as possible, and to write those questions on individual small cards. And then we put the cards face down on the table and in pairs have conversations where the question is determined by turning over the card and an extended answer or information or something might be given, and then the interviewer turns over the next card and has to find some way of providing a link to make that a logical next question, even though it might not be. So also, you know, is using that sense of this image and what you then might do with it to not only develop discussion of the actual content and interpretation, but also to practice those linking from one idea to another, and how do you navigate through a natural conversation, and how do you change tack in a conversation if you want to go on to a completely different point. And I think it is really important. I think I saw a comment in the chat earlier this evening that it's really important that we start doing this younger. And so that I think there's all sorts of activities that we could really usefully be doing, and I've started to make much more use, I think, of video in particular, and noticing and seeing and just brainstorming vocabulary that could be attached to a particular image with much younger classes, to develop both more speaking input, even if it's single word or very simple sentence. So nani ga miyemasu ka, what can you see in Japanese, and just using that as a really simple sentence and substituting vocabulary is a really good way of moving towards this. And my final example, with 9 minutes to spare, is, I suppose, really just a reminder to all of us that we've been, in a sense, in a position of having image being used for writing prompts for a really long time, and it hasn't disappeared with the new study design. So it literally took me about 4 minutes this afternoon to find 2 examples, one in Chinese and one in Arabic, from last year's, the 2021 VCEE exam papers, where for many languages often the option for an imaginative essay in the end of the exam is a visual prompt, and is to use the image to do something else. And maybe that's something that we actually have glossed over a bit, and maybe that's why there's lots of comments around to say, oh, but my teacher says you should never write the imaginative essay. Maybe it's something that a number of us are not really confident about, but maybe that's coming more into, you know, what we've been prompted to have a deeper think about and to take more out of. So my question, I guess, to everyone is, how have you prepared your students for these in the past? Because, you know, this is presumably applicable to this whole question of viewing and using image to prompt all other language skills, but particularly speaking and writing. And that just brings me to the thank you very much to Jess and Amanda, and a couple of notices, and then any remaining minutes or people who want to hang on for a bit longer, questions and discussion, very welcome. But a reminder to everybody that the MLTAV website has all sorts of information that you'll find really useful, and I would encourage you to have a really good look at it regularly, including stuff around advocacy support, which is a question that a number of you, I think, have to deal with quite often. There are recordings of previous webinars up on the MLTAV website on a whole range of topics, and they're there for you to look at, and also information on future professional learning opportunities. The big one coming up is the MLTAV turns 75 this year, and there'll be an anniversary conference and dinner on Friday the 2nd of December. There'll also be an AGM snuck in between the conference and the dinner. And there will be a workshop for this community of practice as part of the conference. So our term 4 gathering will be at that conference. And there is also, of course, the link to the MLTAV membership application forms, etc. on the website, which I kind of have to say, don't I? And so I shall stop sharing my screen so I can see people and have a quick look through the questions.